as we saw in a single day, a school shooting in Colorado, followed by an attack on a campus in Utah. And that resulted in the assassination of an activist known as Charlie Kirk. And his assassination was certainly the latest in a troubling trend of political violence in this nation. You think about the April firebombing of fellow Governor Josh Shapiro's home, barely escaped with the safety of his children. A June shooting of a Minnesota lawmaker, Melissa Hortman, and her husband. And it continues. We never forget the assassination attempt on President Trump when he was campaigning last year. Earlier attacks at the home of Nancy Pelosi on her husband. Attempt to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And of course, the attacks on our Capitol on January 6th. And we've even seen domestic terrorism in our own state of New York. And it was just over a few years ago, 3 years ago, when 10 innocent individuals were gunned down doing nothing more than shopping in a neighborhood grocery store. It was a racially motivated killing spree. And in the aftermath of that, but also as a precursor to what is now unfolding, we took immediate action, as we do here in New York. I had an executive order to increase funding for threat monitoring and targeted violence prevention. And in my first budget, I made sure that we could provide more money to localities, $10 million to invest in domestic terrorism grants. We actually knew we needed to beef up our online surveillance. I think there had been just a small handful of people doing this job statewide. And we added 20 employees full-time and almost $16 million to the budget there, and added more people to the operations and focusing on investing in our state police. So we're doing what we can, looking at cybersecurity. Colonel Crow and others give me a regular briefing on the threats in our state and whether they're homegrown or abroad. But it's really gotten to a point where we've really seen enough. How much more can this country endure? And I will call out dehumanizing language that leads to violence anytime. And that does not censor me from telling the truth, but there is a way that incidences or disagreements or policies can be described. Now, earlier today, and I want to thank all the elected officials who joined us here. We heard from every elected official here, but also 6 more leaders who are on Zoom. We can identify those, the leaders from the Senate and the Assembly, majority, minority. I wanted to have a small, more intimate dialogue, but also, really create an environment where people can just speak out and just talk what's on their mind. And it was very important for me to hear. It was very candid. And we talked about the role that we play as leaders, our personal responsibility, and our own social media posts. And should elected officials be on social media when you think about the debates and the fights that continue in that platform, and really, again, just beyond just what elected officials do, just the rise in the hate speech and dehumanization that occurs when things are said that we discuss you'd never say to someone walking down the street or in your workplace or in your place of worship. So there's something that Commissioner Bray talked about how inflammatory rhetoric leads to real violence, and she'll talk about some of the statistics that she monitors regularly. And it's not just a theory. There's something called stochastic terrorism. And what that is that direct linkage between the speech and the action. And what is happening, the dehumanization of people and ideas is leading to these violent consequences. So every leader has to be conscious of their language, all of us. And also, I have a friend, someone I got to know when he led our National Governors Association, Governor Cox of Utah, who it was his home state where the most recent political assassination occurred, Charlie Kirk. And he launched an initiative urging people to disagree better a number of years ago. I, as a governor, and 23 others signed on to this initiative, and he launched it in cities and elsewhere. We had conversations about it. We did some videos. And it was born out of a desire to debate real ideas, but not dehumanize our political opponents or people we disagree with. So I want to thank him for that, but also encourage others to take some of the lessons. We've handed out some literature on the websites and just some basic lessons in humanity. And it's a shame that we have to even talk about that, what you would have learned likely from your parents or in schools or in your houses of worship when you were younger. But how do we lose that? Where does it go? How is that, all that teaching about our shared values as Americans dissipate over a disagreement on a policy or the way someone phrases the debate? That's what we need to figure out. What is happening from that young, innocent age? And is it the radicalization and exposure to social media? We saw that was the genesis of the top shooter in Buffalo. Direct correlation between him imitating and parroting language that had occurred at the Christ the King Massacre Church in New Zealand. So we can do more as elected officials. We need to listen a lot more, respect differences of opinion. And I think it would be surprising to many others who think that there is this divide that's forever there based on your party affiliation. I once represented the most Republican district in the state of New York as a Democrat. I recall going to Congress in my early days, and they had Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other. And I had the audacity to sometimes go across the aisle. There literally is an aisle. And you'd swear that there was some sort of moat or alligators there because nobody else was doing that. There was some fear of crossing over and being seen on the other side. I never had a problem with it because I'd talked to members of the other party, Republicans, about shared interests representing upstate, what we can do for our farmers, what we can do for our communities. And I think we just have to do more about just getting more to that gut level and getting back to the values we learned as we were younger and what defines us, and I've always believed set us apart as Americans, because it doesn't feel like it's there right now. And it's a shame that our children have to grow up in this environment, but it's not too late to change. I grew up in a time of political assassination. John Kennedy, I was very young, John Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King, Bobby Kennedy, the shooting of George Wallace, a candidate for office. Jerry Ford was shot, Ronald Reagan was shot. So it's not new to this generation, but social media has taken it where it has created a more dangerous situation, not just for those national leaders, but also for a political activist or a Minnesota House member. So it's gotten down to a level that's causing a great deal of anxiety among elected officials of all stripes, their families, and all communities. But I do believe that there's a chance for a reset. That's what I want to talk about, is a reset. And despite views of the past, statements of the past, this could be a defining moment for our nation. And that's why I'm so proud to stand with like-minded elected officials from Long Island all the way to Buffalo who had this conversation and feel committed to doing what we can to disagree better and model the behavior that we want to see in all of our residents. And so I will turn it over to Commissioner Bray to give just some highlights of what we talked about and some data, and then ask two of our in-person representatives to give a couple of their reflections, and we'll take some questions then. Commissioner Bray.
Governor, thank you so much. I'm going to give a very high-level overview of some of the data we presented today, and we are distributing the full deck that we presented, the full brief that we presented today for use in reporting. This is a bar chart of terrorist plots and attacks against government targets. What you see in red is where extremist partisan ideology was motivating that attack, and you can see that Prior to 2015, it was incredibly rare in the last several decades, and then we've seen a precipitous increase of attacks that are extremist partisan motivated. One of the things we discussed is how much violence has been an acceptable answer for political grievance. A recent survey, 26% of Americans see violence as usually or always justified to advance a political objective. That's consistent across several surveys, anywhere between 20 and 30%. And we talked as a group about what that means. We also talked, importantly, about the fact that political figures in particular and their acceptance or rejection of violence is actually very powerful in terms of what people think is or is not acceptable. And so that offers us some hope for how we think about it. We also talked about what people can and can't do. Before I get to the slide, I want to say we talked a lot about showing how rhetoric leads to increased threats, and you'll get that in a deck that's distributed, but about how we literally see, people in my job all over this country see that when rhetoric ramps up, particularly when it's dehumanizing, when it's othering, particularly when it accepts violence as an answer, what we see is an incredible spike online in the number of and the volume of threats directed at whatever group of people have been targeted that day. And that incredible increase, we know statistically, does lead to additional violence. And so that'll be in the materials we distribute. And finally, we talked about what we can do about it, right? How do we take on this question? And we had a robust conversation about how to lower the temperature. It focused on, I think, really three things. The first is the fact that so many of the folks standing behind me are friends. So many of them talk about how to solve real people's problems on a day-to-day basis and how we need to make that more public and show that. We talked about social media and how social media has sped the way, sped the dissemination of information, sped the rabbit holes that people can go in, sped the radicalization process and how corrosive that is, and what can folks do as leaders to get people offline, get people outside, get people back connected to their communities. And then talked about setting good examples and specifically how people can set good examples. Talked about sometimes you don't need to say anything, that sometimes after an attack like this, the best thing to do is to condemn the violence and then withhold judgment on motivations for law enforcement to do their work. And then obviously, finally, we talked about Governor Cox's Disagree Better campaign as a model for the rest of the country to follow. I want to invite County Executive Poloncarz to give some remarks.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Governor, for hosting this conversation. We came together, and there are Democrats and Republicans in the room, but we're not here as Democrats and Republicans. We're here as New Yorkers and Americans who are concerned about the tenor and the rhetoric and what has occurred. I knew Melissa Hortman. I had met her. Shared and talked about some of the things that were going on in Minnesota and how they were very similar in New York, even though we had different positions. And when I learned of her assassination, it was a gut punch. But it was also a gut punch to me when there was the assassination attempt on President Trump, knowing the impact that could have on our country, as well as the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And we need to come together, and that's why I'm very thankful that the governor is hosting this discussion, to remind everybody that in a democratic society, we can have differences of opinion. It's important to have differences of opinion. The people in this room and those that are online don't agree on everything when it comes to policy, but we can do it in such a manner where it does not become a blood sport, where people feel like they have to take that next step. Political violence is never acceptable in a democratic republic. If you were upset about the murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, you should be upset about the murder of Charlie Kirk. If you were upset about the murder of Charlie Kirk, you should be upset about the murder of Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark. There's no difference. Murder is murder. Political violence is terrible. I've been subject to death threats. Thankfully, nothing has ever occurred of it, but people were held responsible for their actions and the threats that were made. And we need to remind everybody that the individuals who are serving our community are doing it because they're trying to create a better community for all. We don't always have to agree on the policy, but we can work together, regardless of political affiliations, to create better cities, towns, counties, states, and country. And so I want to thank the governor for hosting this event and bringing us together, and also speaking to our fellow New Yorkers and Americans that when we work together, we accomplish so much more. The divisiveness that we see in our country is something that we will remember for the rest of our lives. And if last week's act is the last act of political violence that we see during our lives, then we will all have accomplished something by reminding everybody we all have a role in our country as citizens, and that is to play an active role in our democracy, not through violence, but through speaking up and letting the elected officials know where they stand on issues and where you stand on issues. Criticism is okay. It's embedded in the First Amendment right of free speech. We always understand as elected officials, we will be criticized sometimes for our actions, but that is where it must stop. It can't go to the next level. So thank you, Governor, for hosting this conversation.
Good afternoon. I'm County Executive Steve Newhouse from Orange County in the Hudson Valley. Governor, I want to thank you for bringing us together. This is the right thing to do. And all my colleagues that are standing behind me, we had a very good dialogue. I will tell you, I didn't know Charlie Kirk. I am a county executive trying to run a county, and more importantly, I'm a father. I got 4 children that, the last couple of days, they're asking me what is going on in this country, and is this country falling apart? And I think we, as elected officials, and the governor's taking the lead here, and some of the stuff that we talked about that the other governors are talking about, to actually take command of the dialogue and say that it's not acceptable to talk in terms of mentioning violence, where now people are taking it seriously. I think going forward, what you're going to see in this country and what you're going to see in these counties across the state and New York State is more security, more intelligence to make sure that we're protecting the public, because everywhere I've gone in the last week, it's on everybody's mind. Are we safe? Is this country going to be okay? The next thing you're going to see is, more importantly, is us making sure that when we hear people speaking, that we stop them and say, this is not acceptable, because for too long they've been getting away with it. There are some good positive things that have happened in the last few days. We're seeing non-typical late night comedians, sports stadiums that normally don't get involved in us, saying this is not America and this is not right. And we need to see more of that, and we need to hold people accountable. So again, Governor, thank you for having us today, and I'm happy to be part of the solution with you.
Thank you.
Governor, I'm curious, you mentioned social media, and I think Commissioner Bray did as well. You've made a really huge effort in social media for children. Do you see any legislative solution here to getting people out of these feedback loops of extremism on social media?
That's an excellent question. It does start with making sure that our children get off on the right foot and are not subjected to bombardment of addictive algorithms designed for profit for large corporations that take their personal data, sell it, or try to, create the addiction, which they're very successful at, that holds our kids close and doesn't allow them to escape, which is why our distraction-free environment, the cell phone ban, is a really tough adjustment for our children. But the praise we're getting from both sides of the aisle is extraordinary. I think there's a lesson for adults in that environment, that your mental health is stronger and your human relationships are deeper when you can escape the clutches of your own cell phone at work all day, or taking a walk with somebody and you're on your cell phone, or you're supposed to be at dinner engaging with your children. So I would say even that cell phone is often the vehicle for the social media content. And I think we all do just need to take a breath and realize there was life before this. It wasn't a perfect life, but I would say the mental health of not just teenagers, which I've studied intensely, but the mental health of adults was far better. So let me take a look at what options there may be, but I think that you've hit on something to, at least through information, talk about healthier New Yorkers overall, and it starts with mental health.
I want to bring up a moment when Democratic lawmakers from Texas were here. You say, and I quote, "This is war, we are at war." Was that a mistake to say?
No, I would say that we're time for a reset when you believe that in the moment it felt very threatening to our democracy. And I feel that I'm a soldier for my democracy. I have to protect my democracy, our democracy. Each one of us have that responsibility. So I felt like our democracy was under attack. But I certainly, with this reset moment, I'm going to be closely thinking about the words that I have and the effect they may have as well.
Governor, you have a possible opponent next year in Elise Stefanik, who has repeatedly referred to Mamdani, the candidate running for mayor, as a communist. A number of Democrats have repeatedly referred to President Trump as saying he's a fascist. So how do you get past that? Because this is constant. It's literally almost on a single, every day you're seeing it, and the people behind you and on the screen are either against or supportive of these candidates. So that's going to continue long after this thing here today. How do you get past that specifically, other than just saying, we need to tone down the rhetoric?
No, you're actually describing the political climate of today. It is the throwing around labels and, ultimately the dehumanization of others that I think could start to spiral into a more dangerous place. And that's what we all have to be on guard of with our own language, particularly. We know what we can control, and that is what we say and do, whether on social media or in person. So that's why the phrase reset is important to me, that people take a step backwards and realize the effect that they may be having unbeknownst to them. You don't know that something you said isn't being taken as a challenge to someone to do something that they otherwise might. So I won't refer to the specifics there, but I will say this, there should be no othering and dehumanizing language, but that doesn't mean I'm forfeiting my right to tell the truth either.
A lot of people start using social media when they're much younger. So, and obviously it develops as they get older in their young 20s, as you saw with the Charlie Kirk suspects. So, what message do you have for parents, for their teenagers to make sure, sometimes they don't know what they're doing on social media?
And again, I look back at the case of the, his 18-year-old on his birthday, a Broome County resident who had been radicalized number of years before, and part of it was during the pandemic, his whole existence was confined to probably his basement because there was no interaction with students in a classroom and no normal activities. Our children were, held captive for a number of years, and that created the opportunity, I believe, that maybe it would have been there anyhow, but I think it fostered that. And so that's something that parents, we talk about, get offline and get outside. It's not just a silly slogan. It's real. It means, tell your kids, no cell phones till a later age. And I'm sorry, if you forget your lunch, you won't forget it tomorrow. Or you'll make friends with somebody and borrow half of their peanut butter sandwich. That's the world I came out of. And so I'm just trying to, in our schools at least, that we have made a major decision. And I think people are going to look back at this time and say, this is when we started saving our kids in New York and making them smarter and more adjusted with the cell phone ban. But parents should be looking at what we're doing in schools and looking to do that at home as well. Go outside and play. Leave your phone here if you have to have a phone. Just go out and engage with others. Go to the mall. Go to the ball field. I think parents have an enormous role here, and if they could take something from this experience about also talking about the language that they use when they talk about what's happening in the news, on television, or their own social media posts. Kids watch everything we do. They watch us intensely. And I'm always surprised what my adult kids will say, well, remember when you said that? It's like, well, you were 7 years old. But be aware that you're shaping the next generation of Americans. And we want them to love this country and respect it, and respect the foundation, which was built on not agreement always, but they did come to the grand compromise that created this democracy that we're still living under 250 years later. And that's an extraordinary experiment that must endure, but one that we have responsibility in our time to make sure that there are not these assaults and these attacks that wear it down. All right, thank you, everybody. All right.